podcast starts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to And Now the Podcast Starts, a show which talks about horror, cinema and anything related that takes the interest of my wonderful co-hosts or myself. I'm TD Velasquez, but you can call me Dan, as always, in Greater Manchester, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by...
Stella Gaynor roasting in Manchester.
And also...
Kirsty Warrow, nicely cool in Shropshire.
I feel like I should have said the temperature that I was at. I'm also roasting, so listeners need to be aware that we are recording this on the hottest day of the year, the 25th of June, which is the hottest day since yesterday, which was the previous hottest day of the year, and the day before that. And I think we've all got our windows open so that we're nicely ventilated. So there might be some extraneous sound that drifts in occasionally. So just to warn the listener about that, it's part of the atmosphere that we're casting for this particular episode.
Sweaty atmosphere.
Yeah, an authentic atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Verisimilitude. That's how Howard once characterised an excess amount of sound on one of our podcast recordings. So yeah, just feel the realism. Okay, folks. So welcome everybody. This week we're going to be talking about TV horror, in particular the cycle of US-led or US-inspired serialised horror on television that began in about 2010 and continues to some extent to this day. And Stella is our expert on that, so she's going to be leading us through that journey. But before we go there, have we got any news from life or from horror that we'd like to share this week?
I have some horror news.
Go on, Kirsty.
So I was quite excited yesterday to learn that Eli Craig, who is the writer-director, I believe, or at least director, behind Tucker and Dale versus Evil. One of the kind of great horror comedies of the last few years, has, with Netflix, I think, just announced a forthcoming horror rom-com, which is titled at the moment, The Hills Have Eyes for You.
Oh.
So that sounds lovely.
I like it already.
Yeah, me too. The title is a stroke of genius, so I have high hopes. So
that's brilliant. Tucker and Dale is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's possibly Alan Tudyk's best role since Firefly, but although
I'm glad you saved that then, Dan.
Sorry?
So I'm glad that you saved that by kind of mentioning Firefly, because.
Well, yes, absolutely. Oh, no. I wouldn't dare. I mean even if Alan Tudyk had somehow not been in Firefly, but just his audition had survived, that audition would probably be better than most actors achieve in their careers. So
yes, and he's a very fine actor with many fine performances to his name. So
yes, true, absolutely. But this is not the Alan Tudyk podcast. Okay, that's great news. Has that director done anything else since Tucker and Dale? Because I haven't seen it, I have to say.
I don't think so, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
I'll just... So this is not terribly well researched. So I thought, that we'd all just get bowled over by the title and then move on.
No,
I was
that's brilliant.
Thrilled with the title.
Yep, me too. All right, so moving on. I don't have any horror or life news really, but I suppose we all have life news in the sense that this week in the UK, or at least in England, they've announced that the lockdown is going to be gradually eased, which means we can possibly go back to the cinema and things like that over the next few weeks. I was wondering how it was affecting you guys as you both work in education. Maybe it's not too clear yet because it seems to, I think at least as far as schools are concerned, they're just going to be closed until September, aren't they? So it's not going to make
my
much difference to
daughter
them.
Can go back because she's year 6, so she can go back, and she has been able to have gone back for 2 weeks now, and she hasn't, but she is going to go back on Monday. So they're doing socially distant learning at her school, so they've got, I can't remember how many pupils they've got in because they've still got the key workers pupils in, but they can only have a maximum of 8 or 7 kids in a classroom. So they can't have the whole school back. But apparently when they go back in September, it should be pretty much business as usual. But I don't know. I'm not convinced. In terms of my work and education, we're all still online, and I don't know what's going to happen when I go back to work, as it were, in September. Well, October, really. It's university, isn't it? We're very lazy. We don't do anything until October. But we don't know yet we don't know what we're doing yet at all. I don't even know. Yeah, I'm just literally do not even know what's going to happen in September. So until then, I am sitting around and mainly complaining about the heat and drinking beer.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. I've been working on my book, actually. I have been doing some stuff. I have been trying to be vaguely productive, but a lot of that is just staring at my laptop and sighing.
Do you want to tell the listeners what the book is, Stella, or
yeah? So it's based on my PhD. So my PhD was, as you will be surprised to hear, TV horror in America and the cycle from 2010 to 2020. My book is essentially taking the same approach, but with more case studies. And in my PhD, I only looked at horror up until 2017. So in my book, I've extended it up to 2020, so I can talk about Castle Rock and things like that. And it should be hopefully being published by Palgrave Macmillan, and I'm just waiting for the go-ahead to finish off the writing for it, really, and it should be out in 2020 is the plan. But yeah, it'll be an academic text, so it'll be ruinously expensive. So if any of the listeners are at college or university when it's out, if you could get your library to buy it, that'd be great.
That's a definite appeal. How about you,
Yeah.
Kirsty? Do you feel that you have any clarity going forward about what's going to happen with your work and your children's school and things like that? All right.
Yeah. Well, no. So, well, my daughter has been attending because key worker.
Yeah.
Me and my husband are both key workers. So she's been going anyway. But she goes to a very small rural school, so it's they're pretty able to socially distance adequately. In terms of my own work, we're at the moment sort of moving forward on the basis that everything is going to be normal, but there in the last couple of weeks we've got things kind of planned in for prepping for in case it's not. So until there's more clarity, it's just really difficult to know what
That's
to
kind
do.
of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Although some people I think are kind of loath to put all the effort into making all their stuff be online.
Yeah, and then
to not be the case.
Yeah.
So I think I'm probably gonna make as much of mine because I teach theory modules, so it's fine. I'll just need to change some of the seminar activities to make it onlineable. There we go. There's a word.
Onlineable. Yeah.
Onlineable. And just see how it goes because I don't want to get to September then we go right, all online and I've done nothing. So trying to walk the line so that I can manage both, I suppose.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, from my part, the effect on me is that I've had weird dreams. Mainly because I think my practical life can't really be affected because even if the lockdown eases in all kinds of ways until vulnerable elderly people are able to go out safely again, I'm still kind of isolated at home with my mum. But I have been thinking about the situation of everything opening up, the cinemas possibly opening up, and the government have some kind of mysterious plan that they're going to discuss with the arts organisations like theatres and things, so that they can open up. What in terms of socially distant theatre, interesting. I've worked in that area and have lots of friends who do, and all I can think is that there's going to be a proliferation of one-person plays.
Oh no!
For the next couple of years, maybe two people, as long as you can guarantee that neither character ever goes within 1 metre of the other one. So
it's just going to be a load of Alan Bennett shows, isn't it?
Well, that's what started on TV this week. Yeah, it's like, whoa, what do we got, guys? Let's dig out the Alan Bennett. Thinking of quite different TV, though, of course, for the last couple of weeks I've mainly been watching The Walking Dead in preparation for this discussion. And somehow that's got
It's
mixed
not.
up in my brain with the lockdown being eased and shops opening. So I had this dream last night whereby there was a zombie apocalypse going on, but also there was all-night shopping. And
Every cloud.
very zombie film, isn't it?
I went into... Well, I think the thing was because in shows like The Walking Dead, everybody tries to be quiet all the time because noise attracts zombies. But in my dream, and following, I think, the logic of Boris Johnson, let's just open all the shops up, it'll be fine. I think someone decided, yeah, but if we open everything up at once, then there'll be so much noise that the zombies won't know where to go, and they won't kind of herd together. So it'll be all right. So therefore, like, all the nightclubs were open and restaurants were open all through the night, and you just had to be careful as you wandered through the streets because there might be one or two zombies that appeared. But you can deal with one or two at a time. It's fine as long as they're not herding together.
Yeah. Less than 6, I reckon you're all right.
So,
not that I've thought about it in detail or anything like that.
Well, that's why you're here, Stella. We want to know that detail. So that's where my mind's gone over the last couple of weeks. Can't imagine why. So on that note, I think we should start talking about horror on television then. On just a note for the listeners, this is going to be a 2-part discussion because, it's mainly going to be concerned with serialised horror stories on TV. We thought it was appropriate to break it up across 2 episodes. And we're going to be going into some detail on some of the shows we talk about. So we can give no guarantees that there will not be spoilers for any TV horror show of the last 10 years. Because it's hard to discuss some of these shows in depth without spoiling certain plot developments. Yeah. So basically, if there's any horror show from the last 10 years that you've really wanted to watch but not got around to yet, probably don't listen to this episode. Go back and watch the show first.
Or maybe we could put in a list on the blog which shows we've talked about. And if one of those is on your list of ones that you've not watched yet, then you can not listen. But if your show isn't on the list, then you can listen, if that makes sense.
That's good thinking, Stella. I will do that.
Excellent.
But we're definitely, undoubtedly going to be going into some detail about The Walking Dead this week. So that's your first warning. Okay, so Stella, we discussed this before, and one of your areas... one of your starting points is kind of been that until relatively recently, TV was traditionally not seen as a place for horror. So, and now it is. So there's a journey to go on. Why was that perception a thing, and how has it changed and why over recent years? Go ahead.
I think to explain that, I'll do, basically, I've got some notes here, sort of a rough and quick history of TV drama development in the United States and how it got to the point it is now, where we're absolutely saturated with lots of long form, expensive dramas, and horror taking up quite a large chunk of that. So up until the late 80s, early 1990s in America, there was 3 major networks, NBC, CBS and ABC, and they were free-to-air networks. They were entirely funded by advertising, and there was just 3. So remember, like in the UK, we just had BBC One, BBC Two, Channel 4 for a bit, and then we got Channel 5, and there was no other choice. It was like that in the States.
Okay.
So they just got these 3 channels. So you got 3 channels with roughly 1 share of the audience each. And people used to watch TV in a very different way than they watch it now. So it used to be people would just consume the medium of TV. So rather than turning on and watching something that they actually were interested in, they'd just turn on and watch something that was the least objectionable. And that whole strategy of programming was called least objectionable programming. And basically TV just consisted of game shows, sitcoms that were set in a family situation, and like police or medical procedural dramas, and there wasn't really much deviation from it. There was the odd little gem here and there, like say Twilight Zone, for instance, or The Night Gallery. Yeah. But it was genuinely least objectionable programming. So TV made for a very, very white, hegemonic, middle class audience, so an audience with no wants or needs or desires or tastes, and it was just basically programming that would offend people the least, so that people didn't switch over to one of the other two channels. So TV was like that for ages, and it was all a bit dull. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, you get a couple more networks arrive on the scene. So Fox turns up, the WB turns up, the cable act is passed in the mid 90s, so a load of cable channels turn up. So what happens then is you've got a process of audience fragmentation. So where you used to have 3 channels and they got all the audience to themselves, suddenly, if you imagine the audience as this massive pie, each channel is getting a smaller slice of the pie every time that there's more channels turning up. And then on cable, you're getting niche channels. So you're getting MTV, or you're getting channels just for children's programming, or you're getting Discovery where it's just science and nature, or you get, I don't know, Nickelodeon or sports channels. So people are able to go and get from television exactly what it is that they want to watch. So the networks, those old big 3 networks, they're panicking, really, really panicking in the mid-90s. So that's why in the mid-90s you get this little sort of mini explosion of more interesting television. So Buffy turns up, The X-Files turns up, stuff that's what you could now start to call genre TV. So it's rather than just being another cop show, or even the procedurals got better. So ER was on, and ER was pretty good, wasn't it? So TV just had to get better because everybody was now fighting for whatever scrap of the audience that they could get. And then they realised that genre drama could attract basically what we'd think of as a very, very loyal audience. Nerds, geeks, horror fans were generally loyal to the genre. So that's what TV channels want, because they want to be able to say to their advertisers or their cable carriers who are charging money to get these programmes, we can give you this amount of audience and they're really dedicated, they're going to keep watching it. Anyway, so on we trudge into the early 2000s, and AMC, that The Walking Dead ended up being on, gets taken over by a very visionary executive director called Charlie Collier. And he looks at channels like HBO, who are a pay premium channel, who have made, by this point, they've made The Wire, Oz, Sex and the City, True Blood, Sopranos, and he's looking at that really, really high quality content and the audience demographics that are going for that. And he says to himself, well, why can't we have premium quality standard drama on cable, which is a lot cheaper for people? So he then gets Mad Men, if any of you watched that, that was a good one, and he gets Breaking Bad. So these are 2 quite gritty, certainly Breaking Bad, very, very gritty, dark drama that you just weren't getting on cable. You were getting it on HBO and Showtime, but you're not getting it in cable, and you certainly weren't getting it on network. So he gets those 2 TV shows, TV dramas, and they're doing really, really well. And all the critics are talking about it, all the press are going wild, like AMC, it's the new channel, everyone's going to love it. And then Charlie Collier says, right, we've got a new show coming, we're going to do The Walking Dead. And all of the TV industry went, what? You're going to do a serialised zombie show? Are you mental? So what AMC did was, AMC was American Movie Classics. It was a channel that just showed movies. So when they started making dramas, they were using their dramas to sort of curate their movie library. So when they showed Breaking Bad, they would have films to lead in and lead out that week's episode of Breaking Bad that were relevant to Breaking Bad. You know, films with anti-heroes in, for instance.
Okay. And
they found that every year they did a Halloween sort of horror movie festival. It was called Fright Fest first? I can't remember. Monster Fest or Fright Fest it was called. And for those 2 weeks, AMC realised that they had their highest viewing figures when they showed 2 weeks of horror movies. So Charlie Collier is rubbing his hands together because he's thinking about all the dollar that he can possibly get. Robert Kirkman and Frank Darabont have come to him with The Walking Dead and said, yeah, do you want to make this? This will be an excellent serialised TV show. So Collier goes for it. He said, right, I can curate this horror film fest of Halloween 2010. And so the 2 weeks before Halloween 2010, they're building up. We're going to show The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, their promotional run started 12 days before Halloween, and it started in Japan. And they had zombies running through the streets of major cities all around the world. And it culminated on Halloween night in Los Angeles. And they showed the very first episode of The Walking Dead. So at this point, all the trade press is still going, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. Zombie TV show. How on earth does that fit with your slate of Breaking Bad and Mad Men? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? They show The Walking Dead, the first episode. It does really, really, really well. All the ratings are great. The demographics are great. Trade press. It's a fluke. It's a fluke. It won't happen again. Episode 2. does even better. Episode 3, even better. By the end of episode 3, Charlie Collier has already said, yep, we're going to do a second season because this seems great. We've got loads of money, we've got loads of advertisers banging our door down to advertise inside The Walking Dead, and it just does fabulously well. So what The Walking Dead did at industrial level, and what it showed to television for that just 6-episode first season, was there was a massive audience out there. They really, really like it. The chatter on Facebook and across social media was huge, and the advertisers were willing to pay ridiculous amounts of money to advertise inside the commercial breaks of The Walking Dead. And basically, TV sat up, took notice, and said, "There's money to be made in horror. Let's do it." And right. The Walking Dead was fabulously gory, so that kind of, what's the phrase I want? Set the bar, I suppose. So every horror that came after it had to do better, had to do more, had to go that bit further, and it did. If you look at the last 10 years of TV horror, it's just got more and more gory. And there you go. Potted history.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you, Stella. But that did touch on something that I've always wondered about, which is, so was AMC a cable channel, did
yes.
you say? So did cable channels have different standards for, how violent they could be and things like that? Is it because... what's the reason for that? Sorry.
Well, basically, so network TV, free-to-air network, is entirely funded by advertisers. So they've got two methods of regulation. There's market regulation. So basically, if the advertisers say, look, that show's a bit much, we're not going to advertise inside of that, they can pull their funding and then the show might get axed. And that happened with the American version of Skins. Got axed because the Parents Television Council, who are a bunch of right-wing nutters, right-wing nutters against fun, they said it's too pornographic. The advertisers pulled their money. So that's market regulation. And then network TV is also regulated by the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, and that's basically like Ofcom here. So they're regulated very, very heavily on network. On basic cable, the FCC does not regulate them. So they have, again, market regulation because they still have adverts, but they also have their own broadcasting standards and practice department. It's basically up to them how far they will go. Right. If you move up a level again to HBO, Showtime, Stars, Cinemax, those channels that you pay for entirely, they have no adverts, so no market regulation, and they're only funded by the subscribers. So that's why HBO, for instance, was able to do these very, very high quality, high violence, high swearing, high drug use, high sex scene dramas years before everybody else, because the only people they had to, mollify or appease with their subscribers, and their subscribers wanted that kind of content. So you've got these differing levels of who you have to answer to. So AMC, they have to answer to basically themselves and the advertisers, but the advertisers with The Walking Dead saw that the demographic was very, very valuable. So basically people 25 to 34, maybe even a bit older, with disposable income, who can spend money on the products that they want to sell you through their adverts. So the horror audience is essentially very, very valuable to the advertisers, and the advertisers, they'll kind of let that slide a little bit now if something's so violent. But The Walking Dead has done some extra violent things later on in series that we can talk about later, where they did get in trouble and they did have to apologise for.
Sure. Okay, wow. That's a very comprehensive sketch of the American TV landscape leading up to the start of The Walking Dead. So that's great. And I suppose the only mystery there that I do find intriguing is that, like you say, there are things like The Twilight Zone and various other examples of kind of genre TV that did poke through the veil over the years. And I wonder what allowed that to happen. I mean, I know that, for instance, Universal in the 70s made a lot of TV movies, one every week, and and they'd be in various genres, and so some of those would be horror, but they'd be very sanitized horror. They'd have no on-screen violence or swearing or anything like that. But there was still some kind of recognition that there was a certain amount of a taste for that stuff. But I wonder sanitized. If go on, Kirsty.
I was just going to say, I was wondering if it's to do with the way in which kind of horror, particularly in those in that context, operates very much around, what we call the off-screen space.
Yes.
Which is cheap.
Yeah.
That
right.
kind of the implied
You mean they don't have
presence
to
of
show
something.
things, so therefore...
It's all suggestive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I think one of the things that I found kind of recently through some independent research is that that there's, with radio drama, obviously a little bit earlier than the Twilight Zone, but the kind of horror and sci-fi were also really kind of popular genres there as well, because it's about that conjuring in the mind of the audience. The horror rather than showing it on screen. So, I mean, it seems to be that cinema has always been this, kind of, perceived to be a high budget media form, whereas television is much more low budget.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't surprise me that shows, whilst not necessarily being kind of seen as being kind of critically worthy from the horror genre, kind of at least kind of early on were popular with audiences and and cheap to make, so therefore kind of an easy option.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that they had with horror, even if it is very, like say, sanitized is a really good way of describing it, and sort of the suggestive horror is kind of where to put it in the schedule. Yeah. So if you've got thinking of the idea of like broadcast flow, like where does it go? And if you've got on a Thursday night on NBC, you've got your latest police procedural on, and then that goes head to head with ABC's new sitcom. Where does the horror fit into the schedule? It doesn't sit nicely anywhere. Yeah. And these older, more suggestive horror shows, they were kind of, like you say, slated a bit as not being as authentic enough as cinema horror. And Stephen King in particular was particularly bad for it. So he would let lots of his works be adapted for television, for network television, and then complain that it wasn't horrifying enough. And in his book called Dance Macabre, there's a whole chapter on TV horror in general, and basically he just doesn't like TV as a medium, but he's really, really bitter about it. And it's like, but you gave your network, you said they could do it, and you've been paid for it, stop your bloody whinging. Yeah. But so But he's basically saying the point, if you can't see the monster, what's the point? But since then, there's been other writers. So the Stacey Abbott, and Lorna Jowett, their book called TV Horror, incidentally, they make a wonderful argument for how, in those conditions of not being able to show stuff, the conditions of having a smaller budget, the conditions of not knowing where in the schedule your show's going to go, actually these older TV shows, Night Gallery, Twilight Zone, even, the X-Files and stuff, they were so creative with what they did to actually still be quite scary. Remember watching some of those older stuff in your kid, like, do you remember Tales from the Unexpected, Roald Dahl stuff that was on UK TV? Some of those were terrifying, but they didn't show anything. No. And there was a Twilight Zone that I watched when I was a kid, and it still bothers me now, and it was... I don't quite remember the full story, but essentially a woman goes a bit mad and she's got loads of mannequins in her house and she's talking to them like they're real. And then I think she turns into a mannequin at the end, and that's it. And it was just, it really bothered me, because they did a lot with very little. So there's a lot to be said for the creativity of the older horror stuff before we got to 2010 and everyone's like, right, yep, go for it, do what you want.
Well, no, there is, and I think a really good illustration of that is if you look at the Twilight Zone movie, which was made in the early 80s, and has, it is a movie, so it can be more violent and things, but it's essentially a remake of several episodes of the series. And if you compare the original episodes with the versions for the remake, they're usually just as good or better. Because, and I think it's because of the inventiveness that the directors and the writers had to display. Yeah. To get around the constraints.
I think another just one more thing to add with the perceived problem of putting horror on TV is if you do have an advert break in it. I can't remember who wrote it, but I think it was Gregory Waller wrote about it. He was saying one of the issues is if you're building a nice horror tent story and the audience is on the edge of the seat and waiting to see what's to happen, and then that's broken by a very sort of bright and cheery commercial for washing powder, sort of it disrupts the horror somewhat. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of seen as problematic as well, because you keep breaking it rather than, holding that tension across the half hour or hour long slot that you have. But now, I guess now, better's not the right word. There's been more development in writing narratives where people are prepared to come back after the commercial break, or you're watching horror series on Netflix where there isn't one, and now that's not a problem so much anymore.
And I think like American TV writers have been schooled for generations now in how to write kind of cliffhanger little narratives where
Sure.
every now and then there's a dramatic point where the audience will stick around despite the commercial break. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and that obviously affects some of the series we're going to be talking about, like the AMC one, but also, as you say, is solved in the HBO/Netflix model of advert-free viewing. Okay, so that's a fascinating area for development. That just thinking about how TV has changed over all this time. Kirsty, is there anything else you'd like to feed in?
I was just reflecting really on the kind of the shows that kind of grabbed me and scared me when I was growing up. And again, for kind of people of our generation, the television was the main kind of, visual medium, and films were somewhat, kind of special, weren't they? In terms of, you had your VHS, or you had to, kind of look at what was on the television schedules about what film was on when. And I think whilst we're kind of focusing on American television, obviously, I think, for a lot of people like us, Doctor Who, that kind of the way in which we view, or with Doctor Who, how people talk about having to watch from behind their sofas or behind cushions, which kind of demonstrates, at least in British culture, how accessible and mainstream horror was, even though it was kind of, horror via sci-fi, via sort of fantastic.
Absolutely.
And then I was thinking about one of my very favourite kind of shows, which I think, I'm not sure if it predates Buffy. When did Buffy start?
Buffy started 96.
96, yeah. Okay, so it does just. American Gothic.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah,
I was thinking about that a lot while watching American Horror Story because of Sarah Paulson.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I
love her.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Fantastic. She's so good.
But I think that was my first experience watching something that I could strongly identify as being horror on television. Obviously, been scared by episodes of The X-Files, but that was very much framed as science fiction still. Whereas American Gothic was, kind of very focused on that sense of, battles between good and evil, and kind of allusions towards, the devil and God and whatever.
Yeah.
But done really effectively in a way that I'd felt I hadn't seen on television at that point. But obviously, I was 15 when I saw it, so
so you shouldn't have been watching it, should you?
Well, I was allowed, so
I think that's really interesting what you're saying about the horror being hidden inside something else. I think that's happened in various other examples. I think, Dan, you mentioned possibly in an email exchange Silent Witness in the UK.
Yes.
Casualty.
Casualty, yeah. Like the opening bit, or opening
the injury
sequences
of the
they were
week.
just, horrific.
Which
Absolutely.
I don't think they do anymore.
Do they not?
I haven't watched it regularly, but there definitely seemed to be a thing when we were younger that there'd be an injury every week, there'd be a horrible accident. Whereas now, they have ongoing storylines about, people with terminal illnesses, or there's a serial killer. One of the doctors is a serial killer or something like that.
Really?
But,
really? Where have I been if that's been going on in Casualty?
That happened in Holby City, and it was Paul McGann.
Did it?
So, so the kind of tone of it is different now, and more serialised as well, which I guess is part of the wider shift that we'll be talking
progress,
about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get the sense that horror never had a great respectability on TV in this country, and the nearest thing that you get to kind of respectable horror that wasn't really anything else was the M.R. James adaptations that the BBC used to make in the 70s,
Yeah.
But at the same time, even those, there's a slight difference between a ghost story and a horror story. You know, if I'm talking to an audience of people who I think might be a bit suspicious of horror stuff, I'll say I like ghost stories because it seems just a little bit more respectable. Everything else, I think, was possibly an example of writers and directors feeling constrained by those kind of limits that we're talking about that were imposed on them. But they tried to push it from within whatever genre they were in. So, you know, you'd have a very sinister crime drama like Taggart is very weird and dark. Well, it was. And
was the other one Cracker? That was good as well.
Yeah. Jimmy McGovern's Cracker, And therefore, I do think you kind of get horror cropping up. And like you say, it would be in sci-fi to an extent, in Who, and you know, that was happening in America because a lot of Star Trek episodes are also quite horrific. But
you get little bits popping up in soaps as well, because you think of. Do you remember in Brookside when she stabbed her husband? She was a domestic violence victim, and she stabbed her husband and buried him under the patio.
Yeah.
It was clearly Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. That was quite horrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a lot later, but you know, they did the whole storyline in Coronation Street about Richard Hillman, which included the line, "You're Norman Bates with a briefcase."
Ooh.
No, that was in about 2000. That was while we were at university that was happening.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was always kind of pushing through, but there was never a kind of mainstream acceptance of it. I mean, I think it's kind of important that, or rather, it's suggestive that, you know, there's a great book about British horror films called English Gothic by Jonathan Rigby, and when he published his first edition in the year 2000, it didn't have anything about TV. But by the time he did his third edition, I think in 2005, there was a whole afterword or a whole section at the end that was about TV horror. And it kind of had, there was an afterword by the writer David Peary, who made a point that, you know, TV has been frightening us for decades, but it never gets talked about, never really gets thought about. And a lot of the most frightening stuff were the things that had no budget. There'd be dramas with two people in a room, and somehow they'd make it really frightening. But the people who actually run TV don't seem very receptive to that. They don't really want to remember that. And it's like Ghostwatch, you know, as we discussed the other week. That happened and had such a huge impact, but the impact of it was that it was immediately buried. You know, they
never
didn't
speak of it again.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you'd like to think these days, hopefully, they grab Stephen Volk and Leslie Manning and say, "Can you make us another one of those last week, please?" But instead, you know, those guys never got together. Well, I think there might have been some minor projects they worked on, but, you know, there was nothing like that again ever, and the show was never repeated. And I think that would be different now. I suppose here's the point where I do my bit of name dropping, although it is a name that I've already dropped. I spoke to Stephen Volk once at a screening, and I actually... Thank you.
That was the name dropping.
No, boom.
Clang.
And, and I did say to him, you know, why is it that TV doesn't do more horror when it actually has a great success track record if you look into it, and a lot of TV horror examples are kind of more frightening than movies are. And he basically told me that essentially it's a question of permission. When you write a horror movie script for the cinema screen, you can trust that the audience have paid for their tickets to see specifically that movie, and therefore they're giving you permission to frighten them or disturb them. Whereas on TV, you kind of you can't trust that, and the commissioners don't trust that. So if they do try horror, they have to either disguise it as something else, or you kind of trick the audience into going into a horror story by having it start out like something else,
Yeah, of course
so it's
that's
that
not
question of where you put it then, isn't it? So maybe if Ghostwatch, maybe if they'd put it on at 10 p.m. rather than 9 p.m, it mightn't have been as bad. I say bad, you know what I mean? As problematic.
Yeah.
Well, because they certainly would have lost the problem of the child audience accidentally catching it. Yeah. Well, yes. Sorry, Kirsty, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, of course, that distinction is largely now disappeared just because of the way in which TV consumption has changed. Is that, the parental controls you can put in on Netflix or any television, really, in order to ensure that your children aren't accessing particular types of content. But there is, with that whole on-demand thing, there's just a greater sense of I am giving you permission because I am, I'm downloading and I'm streaming and I'm choosing to watch this. And equally, that we have much greater power to go, as individuals consuming, bits of media to go, no, I don't like this, and turn it off and, and find something else. So,
And Netflix, they thrive on that illusion of choice. It's all up to you. We've got it all here for you, and it's all up to you. That's their whole shtick, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. Something else occurred to me as well, which I think it sort of plugs into Stella's kind of discussion of the kind of overview of the kind of American development of American television, is that just the kind of concept of American television in kind of starts in the 2000s as being kind of quality, or the golden age of American which is the kind of the development of HBO and more serialized. Is that right term? So like longer narrative arcs, whereas the kind of the trend had all the mainstream. The mainstream broadcasters had been doing kind of very episodic things like Law and Order. You can watch a single episode and it's kind of largely done. The narrative is largely over in that particular 45 minutes. Whereas obviously things like Deadwood and The Wire, we're doing much kind of bigger arcs, and of course I think that prestige then ends up with viewing figures and critical success, which leads to more investment in those types of things. And it seems to me that horror in particular seems to do better along that serialized line, because you can build the tension for longer, rather than kind of that sense of it all must be wrapped up in 45 minutes.
Yeah, because I think certainly The Walking Dead, it's while it so when it landed in 2010, it was something new to television. First off, it was a horror serial that wasn't on HBO but had an enormous budget. And then second of all, it was zombies, and no one was putting zombies on television because zombies, what's he called? Let me look at that book behind me. I can't remember his name. Russell someone or other. Sorry, Russell, I can't remember your second name. He said that zombies are the great unwashed of cinema. They're like monsters that people aren't really interested in. But then there was the zombie resurgence, and by 2010, the zombie resurgence was kind of trickling away in cinema. We'd all had enough of zombies by then, so it was like, why are you putting this on television? What are you doing? So it was something new. So while it appeared to be this something new and this bold leap for AMC, it actually fulfills a lot of very old or traditional TV logics. So in the first off, it gets, like you said, the demographics, the viewing figures, the advertiser revenue, and then it does have the long form narrative that was developed throughout the 2000s, but it also still does, even now in season, where are we, 10 has just finished, it still does a monster of the week. So despite having these huge, long, sprawling narratives that go on for a decade, it still deals with a particular zombie of the week. There'll be some little zombie showdown scrap fracas that they use for two reasons. So the first reason is because it's still, at the end of the day, even though 10 years later, it's still a zombie show, so we've got to have some zombies in it. But also, it shows off how technically skilled the special effects departments are. And they use their zombie technical excellence, I've called it in my book, they use that as promotional material. Say, look how good this is. It looks fantastic. And every week there'll be there'll be a zombie who was maybe been stuck under a pile of sand for 3 years, so that one looks and behaves a certain way. Or there'll be a zombie that's become kind of part of a tree and jumps out of a tree. Or there'll be waterlogged zombies, or and so every week there'll still be a monster of the week to deal with. So that's still a very, very old horror sort of narrative rhythm to do.
Yeah.
So say like Twilight Zone, Night Galleries, they were monster of the week, or even LA Law or Law and Order, they had a crime of the week. So they're still doing that quite old structure, despite being we're something new, we're doing zombies on TV, look at us. Like, actually you're not doing anything that much different. And now it's quite, essentially it's a soap opera with zombies now.
I could be wrong, but I think the monster of the week tradition was actually started by the Outer Limits
really?
on American TV in the 60s, and they used to
Do you know what?
call
I've never watched any of them.
I've got the box set of the second season, and there's some really good stuff in there and some not so good stuff. But I mean, for instance, there's the episode which James Cameron was sued for ripping off when he made the Terminator, and if you watch like the first 2 minutes of it, you just go, "Oh yeah, that's the Terminator." It's so precise, but no, the Outer Limits always had some kind of monster, and apparently, I guess the phrase "monster of the week" had not really been coined yet, so they used to call it the bear. What's this week's bear? And there'd always be a different creature. There'd be a monster under the bed or whatever. So and that's an example, as we were saying earlier, of like horror kind of hiding within another genre, because even though the Outer Limits was science fiction, if it has a monster in it, to me, to some extent, it's horror. Even if it's aimed at children or whatever, a monster is by nature, it's a horrific creature that has the effect of frightening you. So therefore, I think the Outer Limits, I think, it was kind of known for that, to the extent that the audience would have been disappointed if there wasn't a monster. So, therefore, whereas the Twilight Zone could get away with not doing that. It could just have some weird episode or some comedy episode, but it didn't have to have a monster in it. The Outer Limits kind of did. But you're right to link that to, the criminal of the week in a crime show. Or whatever, or special guest patient of the week in Casualty, or whatever, to go back to that one. And also, just specifically on The Walking Dead, it has to be said that it's really impressive that they do create, a variety of, every week pretty much there's a new kind of zombie makeup effect done. That I'd really wouldn't blame them as a producer if they were using the same extras playing zombies with the same makeups on over again. Because who's going to notice at the end of the day, week to week? They could probably get away with doing the same ones over and over again, but they don't really. It's really quite impressive.
They don't, because they've got the money to not do. They've got the money to develop it and keep making, as many different zombies as Greg Nicotero can pull out of his brain. I mean, the zombies have become essentially kind of pretty much part of the mise-en-scène now, I think, of The Walking Dead. It is, the zombies aren't the main threat anymore, and they stopped being the main threat probably end of season 2.
Yeah,
maybe they stopped being the main threat.
I've watched up to the end of season 5, and I'd say that the zombies are just kind of the wallpaper now, really.
Yeah, it's just the scenery.
Sometimes
and they just
literally.
have them into
zombie wallpaper. Brilliant.
Yeah, I'd have that in my house. But they have to keep it up. Go on.
Shall we talk about The Walking Dead specifically in as much detail as we'd like then? So I didn't discover the show until a few years later. Were you around and watching when it was new, Stella?
I started it about halfway through season 2. So, 2011 was when I started watching it. I didn't catch it right at the start. I had not long since become a mum, so I don't think I knew what was going on anywhere at that point. I started watching it from about halfway through season 2, and I watched a couple of episodes and then decided to stop, and I'd just go back and get the DVD from the season 1 and watch it properly. And I watched season 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all on DVD, so I smashed through them as quickly as I possibly could, and I thought, this is great, really fast paced, love it. And then I started watching it from season 6 onwards, watching it week to week, and I was like, oh, was it always this slow, or was I just smashing through it on DVD? So I think it is slower than I originally thought it were, unless it's slowed down in recent years. I can't really tell, because like I say, I've watched half of it in one viewing habit, and the other half week to week. So yeah, but you're late to it, aren't you, Dan? You've only just started watching it.
Yes, and
relatively.
I think you've brought up something really interesting there, which is the difference in the pleasure of experiencing a show, binge watching it versus watching it week to week. So I've always binge watched The Walking Dead. Because I'm so late, I can afford to do that. There's a million episodes that I've not seen. I think I should probably just kind of sketch in my TV tastes, because they'll inform the way I look at this and the way I look at the kind of recent TV horror. Is that I am slightly suspicious of TV horror, because to me, I love long-form television drama. My favourite thing in the world is the 1985 BBC miniseries Edge of Darkness, which is 6 hours long. And it's a kind of bizarre sort of science fiction conspiracy thriller. And it's really Byzantine and moving and deep, and you care so much about the characters. And I kind of, having seen that and seen a few other similar length kind of shows, I came to think these are like movies, but actually even better, because they're just a bit longer. They're twice as long, or maybe 3 times as long, and they have that much more depth, and therefore that much more emotional investment. The disappointment with them that can happen is that you care so much about the story and about the characters in it that at the end, the ending is not satisfying.
Yeah.
It can't live up to how much you've become invested, which is a problem that films don't face, really. But with horror, I'd always kind of thought, but surely horror is kind of more effective in short bursts, because fear is a more kind of primal emotion. And therefore I was never hugely attracted to long-form TV horror. Like I said, the British TV tradition of horror was a lot of the time in things like the one-off ghost story. It was done in 50 minutes kind of thing, and the horror anthology and things like that. So that's where it came from when looking at the Walking Dead. But also, the thing about it which drew me to it was that I love zombie movies, and I love the George A. Romero ones particularly. And I thought that format that George A. Romero pioneered in Night of the Living Dead could be extended, because basically it's suspense, and you can draw out suspense in a way that you can't draw out so much shock or terror, but I thought, okay, so this Walking Dead could be basically Night of the Living Dead, but 6 to 10 hours long, or even longer.
Longer,
And as I started watching it, I was really pleased to discover, that's basically what it is. And also, I came to it with the knowledge of Frank Darabont's involvement, and I love his movie The Mist, which is
only
one of
for
the
season
best.
1 though.
Yes, I know, and you maybe can explain a bit more about that. I know something about why he left, but I don't know that I know the truth. But
nobody knows the truth.
Okay.
It's did he walk? Was he sacked? Nobody really knows.
Well, he still gets a credit on it after that, so hopefully that he's still getting some money. So good for him. What I do think is that the first episode of The Walking Dead, which is a 90-minute or 2-hour pilot, which he directs and writes, is a stunning film.
It's great, isn't it?
It's so powerful, but because of having the option of binging it, I just went straight to episode 2 and 3 and 4. Basically, the whole of the first series is a long movie.
Yeah, elongated zombie movie.
And it leaves you with, not... The thing is, it can never have a satisfying traditional kind of return to equilibrium ending. But that's because in the apocalypse genre, there never can be that ending, really. If the start of your story is the world ends, what's going to happen at your end of your story? It's not going to happen. The world's not going to come back. Unless it's the movie of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which case the world does come back. But so I had that inbuilt knowledge that I wasn't going to get a closed ending to it, but I was fine with that because again the suspense kind of carried forward and I enjoyed it on that level. Kirsty, what was your experience of early Walking Dead?
Well, I unlike you two, I watched it live. I remember it coming and that sense of, ooh, this is something exciting, something different, and the kind of buzz that was around it. Again, partly because of Darabont and partly, I think, because of Kirkman and
Gale Anne Hurd's the producer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Aliens, I mean, there's a local.
Oh yeah.
There's a local connection as well for where I am, which is kind of near Shrewsbury, because Charlie Adlard lives here, and he's well known in the town as being one of our, kind of most kind of successful sons. So there was, I think, there was a kind of a local novelty. Yes, I'm speaking to you now from a room that contains a Charlie Adlard original. I've just to gloat slightly.
Wow.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so I kind of remember it coming, and I remember being quite excited about it. I've got to be honest, I'm not a fan of the zombie genre at all. It's not my type of horror. My husband, however, it's his absolute favourite, and he has a zombie plan and everything. So he was,
Right.
there was no way that he wasn't going to watch it. And then it was just, I think, was it 2010? Did you say, Stella?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of era before everybody gets Netflix, and kind of that sort of streaming is a big thing. So we watched it live, and we watched it kind of week to week, and I remember kind of going, oh, actually, no, this is kind of exciting. It felt, I forgot to be honest, but I'm not sure where the kind of linearity of like the original source material is. Like the first episode, the setup felt a bit 28 Days Later.
Oh yeah,
very
definitely.
much so.
Waking up in the coma from the
I
right
was
from
kind
the
of like,
start.
oh, okay, but again, it's because of that, this explosion of what a kind of a big budget could do on television. I've been quite impressed with the scope of it and the makeup and the visual effects and all that kind of stuff, that I was quite sort of drawn into it, even though it wasn't my favourite genre. I quite enjoyed the first couple of seasons, and then I think I basically kind of didn't make it any further, I think, than season 3, partly for kind of parental issues. I think there were children in the narrative under threat, and I had to, being the mother of a small child at the time, just went, no, I can't do that. And I haven't kind of gone back to it, but it's really, being kind of culturally aware, and having my husband around, it's been sort of omnipresent, even though I've not watched it, and I've been aware of what's been going on in the show, even though I've not watched it. So
his
my
friends
husband's got the
stuck with
opposite
it.
thing.
Yeah, I like the fact that both of you have this kind of dichotomy with your husbands.
Owen could tell you what's going on in The Walking Dead, but he doesn't watch it. But he's, it just sort of happens around him. Yeah. But he does know about certain things. He might come downstairs because I'm crying because it's on. Yeah. So I'm watching it, or and he'd be like, "Oh, hello, he's dead, is he?" Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting as well, because I've got a few friends sort of in the fan studies community. Yes. So kind of, and a few of them. So there's a shout out to Bethan, who does who's big Walking Dead fan, and she's been to is it Walker Stalker? Yeah,
that's what I want for all my friends who are listening. That's what I want for my 40th birthday present. Yes, tickets for that. Yes. Good.
And she also did one of the tours in the States as well, where you go to.
Oh, I'd love to.
So so I'm kind of aware that there's a big fan community around it, and a lot of which is when you were talking before about the kind of the monster of the week and the kind of the emphasis placed on the makeup. I was just thinking about that partly comes from it, doesn't it? That sense that producers know that a lot of the kind of production details will be sort of out ahead of the episodes airing, and so they kind of and viewers will view with a kind of kind of multi-dimensional, media experience in terms of social media interaction, seeing the trailers and, all of that kind of stuff, which makes those characters or those, kind of monsters slightly more meaningful within the world of the text.
Sure.
Yeah.
And horror fans love knowing the details of how stuff's made anyway. You've got magazines like Fangoria and stuff that show detail how special effects are done. But when you mentioned like fan studies and the fan activity around The Walking Dead, AMC exploits that massively. So straight after The Walking Dead, you've got Talking Dead, which is where they discuss the episodes that's just been on. And obviously, I watch that like the sad case that I am. But it is just absolute direct exploitation of fan practice. And Talking Dead doesn't quite get the figures as The Walking Dead gets, but it gets enough. And they've still got adverts inside it 'cause it's still an hour-long show, and that costs them next to nothing to make because they're just people in a studio talking about what's just been on. So AMC are really on the button with utilising existing fan practice, which is to go online and chatter after the episode to talk about what you've just seen and to speculate about what might happen next week, and AMC uses that to its advantage. One of the things that I thought of before was we were talking about the development of characters and how you kind of latch onto them a little bit. In The Walking Dead, that's where they've come a cropper a few times, a number of occasions. So they are doing a monster of the week. They are doing some sort of gory death a week as well. So, characters come and go with fair regularity. And one of the most loved characters of The Walking Dead in season 7. Is that early enough to talk about who it is?
I think we can talk about it. I know, I've not seen it, but I know who it is. It was was a big story a couple of years ago. Yeah.
So when Glenn gets brutally murdered by Negan, and it's in the comics, so it was already out there. It was issue 100 of the comics. Glenn gets his head bashed in with the barbed wire covered baseball bat, and it's brutal in 2 dimensions and black and white in the comic. But on the TV show, it was the first episode of season 7. The last episode of season 6, the murder happens because they're all on their knees in a semicircle. The murder happens and you don't know who it is, and they just showed it from the point of view of the person getting their head bashed in, and they had like blood run down the screen, and that's how they closed the end of season 6. Everyone's like, oh my god, we've got to wait however many months to find out who it is. So season 7 starts, it opens, and they take an awfully long time to get to the murder. They do lots of jumping around in the narrative, so it takes to like the 3rd section. So you got like 4 sections in the hour. It takes to the 3rd section for us to see that the first person to get killed, he kills Abraham, and everyone goes, oh, maybe Glenn's not going to get it. And then Daryl does something stupid and he swings around and he bashes Glenn's head in. Now, he's previously just bashed Abraham's head in, and it was brutal and it was full on, no cuts, showed the lot. Bashes Glenn's head in, his eye pops out. It's a fantastic piece of practical effect. No CGI in it. It's really, really well executed. But the press went mad. The fans went ballistic. They were like, everyone took to Twitter, Walking Dead, it's too much. I'm not watching it anymore. How could you do this? It's like, well, we all knew it was coming, and it's a zombie show and it's a horror show. And Greg Nicotero had to hold a press conference the next day to basically explain himself. Say, why did you do that? And I was like, what? Yeah, it was harsh, and I bawled my eyes out, and I felt sad for about 3 days afterwards. Like, Glenn's my friend, but it was just, they've crossed the line, I think 3 times now, where they've got in trouble, not just from maybe the trade press saying, no, you shouldn't be doing that, but by fans going, whoa, easy there, that's a bit strong. But I think it's when you've got this really, really long character development. Glenn was in it from the very first episode. He gets Rick out of the tank, at the very, very start. Is there for 7 seasons. Is the only character who still retains any sort of moral fibre 3 or 4 years down the line, however long the timeline's supposed to be. And then he gets killed in such a brutal way, and all the fans were like, oh no, what have you done? And it was like, it's horror. So that's where you get this pushback. So you've got character development of long form drama, but it's horror, so nasty things are going to happen to them.
Yeah,
I wonder. It's problematic again.
Sorry, Stella. I wonder to what extent that is connected a little bit to the institution. In that, if Walking Dead was HBO, then particularly in a Game of Thrones world,
yeah, sure.
then it's kind of like, oh, well, it's disappointing, and we'll all be angry, but we're not get too angry because it's kind of what we expect from that particular institution, channel, whatever. Whereas AMC being slightly more accessible,
in that middle ground,
not so much. But I think it's fascinating, isn't it, because it really does speak to the way in which viewers often, with that serialized kind of arc and kind of weekly character development and getting to kind of really aligning with characters or finding an allegiance with them, is that it becomes much more of a melodramatic experience as a spectator rather than a horror one.
So we're watching this very visual horror gore happening in full colour, full eye-popping, brain-squishing colour. Negan hits him once and Glenn tries to talk to Maggie, and it's all very, very emotional. Like I said, I was bawling like a baby, and it was very melodramatic, and the rest of the episode is just so sad, really, really sad. And then the rest of that season was a bit shit, but they pulled it back in late season 8, season 9, they pulled it back, but most of 7 and 8 was pretty dull. So you could probably give them a miss, Dan, if you want. And come
I
back
might just jump straight to season 9, to be honest.
Season 9's got the Whisperers, which is the next baddies that use zombie skins to put over themselves as like camouflage.
Okay.
So that's really good. So our group, as it were, they think. So they're watching these packs of zombies walking by who are whispering to each other, and our good group are all going, "Oh my God, the zombies can talk!"
Right.
It turns out it's the Whisperers, and then they're an excellent sort of new bad guy for them to deal with, and it's a female-led group of bad guys, as it were. So it's really, really good, season 9.
And I think I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. You might know this, Stella. I think that the showrunner is female now as well, isn't she?
She is, yeah. She definitely she was on it doing various other roles for a number of years, and I think she directed a few times, and then now she's fully taken over. I can't for the life of me remember her name, which is really insulting, but the showrunner is now female.
Is her name Gale Anne Hurd?
It's not Gale Anne Hurd. No, she's still producing it.
She's still in the exec producer position.
Yeah, she's still doing that, and she after Glenn's death. Like it's real. After Glenn passed, Gale Anne Hurd did she released an official statement and stuff. It was mad. It was just mad.
What I think we've learned, though, over the course of this, not this particular episode, but the whole series, is that press conferences normally mean that horror makers have done their jobs.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Everyone's horrified.
At the end of the day, you have to offend people to a certain extent. You can't really make non-offensive horror.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a keynote of the era we're in, of TV horror, I guess. I'd just like to say a few things to pick up on some, stuff that both of you just said, if that's okay, over the last few minutes, because I was just waiting for a point. Here's a random one. So you were talking about The Talking Dead, Stella.
Yes.
So lots of shows have that now, lots of American shows have the follow-on talking show. I like to think of them as the children of Big Brother's Little Brother, which Russell Brand used to present in 2009.
I used to love that.
So was the Walking Dead one the first of this trend, or had there already been other shows that did that before the Walking Dead?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say Talking Dead did it first, because after Talking Dead did it, 'cause it did it from season 2.
Right.
So that would be 2011 crossing over into early 2012, and then after they did it, they started doing it after Breaking Bad as well,
which was called Talking Bad.
Talking Bad, I believe. Someone up all night thinking of that one.
Right.
So it appears to be a thing, and again another trend that The Walking Dead has set off, that lad, you can make some more money out of this.
It makes complete sense.
It really does,
And I was also thinking about, I mentioned how, Stella, with you mentioning how maybe you sensed that the show could actually be seen as boring once you started watching it week to week. Having never done that myself, I suspect I'm not sure how I'd react with it like a weekly serial, because there is the frustration of turning up each week and the story not progressing maybe as much as you'd hope.
Or if they go off and tell another offshoot story and they don't circle back for a couple of weeks, and
yeah,
it's a bit frustrating.
I mean, Kirsty, you said you did watch it week to week. That was on Channel 5, if I remember correctly, when it started in the UK. Did you find that it worked as a serial?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember kind of feeling like it dragged in any way. But I think the experience has changed, though, hasn't it? So I think the shows that I now have to wait week to week for, I find it frustrating that I have to wait week to week for, because I'm now just much more conditioned to have all episodes available at once, so I can binge it.
It's like we've been spoiled a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So so I was just much more used to having to do that in 2010, 2011 than I am almost 10 years later. So, or 10 years, and
Our viewing habits have changed so much.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah. Well, I'll have more to say about that next week when we come to talk about American Horror Story, because I think my feeling is that serialization is fine. I mean, we've already mentioned Doctor Who. I'm a Doctor Who fan. I'm kind of used to that. You get a bit each week. But I think those kind of programs tend to be very plot driven. Whereas to me, the way I see horror is not so much plot driven. It's kind of sensation driven, and therefore would I kind of find it frustrating, kind of passed out week to week. And The Walking Dead, again, I find that an exception to that, because really it's a drama. Yes, it's in the horror genre, but you talked about how it's kind of character-led, and how the zombies become kind of part of the background. And I think, certainly as far as I've watched, which is to the end of Series 5, by the time of that series... I like the continuity of this, by the way. The zombies become more and more rotted over the course of the series, so that they're really easy to kill a few years in. Like, so there's a scene in an episode in Series 5 where they kill a load of zombies with a hosepipe, i.e. shooting water at them.
Is that Abraham on top of the fire truck?
It's not Abraham, it's the guy who pretended to be a doctor. I can't Eugene.
Oh, Eugene.
Yeah.
Eugene and his mullet.
Yeah, he's a great character. He's like the Roy Cropper of the zombie apocalypse. So in a way, I think The Walking Dead would still work as a serial even without the zombies. I talked to you the other week, Stella, or at least I mentioned about the series I like called Survivors, which is basically The Walking Dead with no zombies.
Right.
And and therefore you'd have trouble positioning it in the horror genre, but I do think it's gripping and terrifying, because it's all about the depths that people will sink to in this kind of extremist situation, and that's what The Walking Dead becomes about. Basically after a while, people pretty much know how to handle the zombie threat. Because
if you can't by now, you're not going to survive this environment, are you? So everyone who's still there, they're all right with it.
But it becomes this progression where, certainly in season 4 or 5, the characters move to a new settlement quite frequently and meet some new people, and every time that happens, you think, are these people going to be mad? What are they going to be like? Is this going to be dangerous? And no direct spoilers, but more often than not, they turn out to be bad.
Are they going to try and kill you?
Yeah. And that's what the drama becomes all about. Oh, are they going to escape from them? Are they going to get revenge? Who's been left alive? And I think it works. I really enjoy that. And the zombies are really just the background to that. Sorry, Kirsty?
Can I interject a second? Just it's you were saying before about how you felt that horror is a sensation-driven experience rather than the plot-driven experience, and I think that's true maybe more of film than television, because with television, particularly if you are watching on that week-to-week basis, you need the kind of narrative in order to kind of lure you back in, don't you? That kind of cliffhangers.
That's true.
And the investment in the characters. So I think on television, horror can absolutely be both narrative or both plot driven and narrative. But the point you were just making there about that kind of sense of, they're kind of moving to new settlements is, for me, and then again, having not seen the whole show, so you have to forgive me if this sounds at all like a criticism. It's not meant that way. But one of the kind of tropes of zombie films is that sense of, your survivors finding sanctuary, and the sanctuary is safe for a while but not permanently, and of course that if we've got a long running television drama then it's of that genre, then of course they are going to keep finding themselves in terrible situations with initially seeming like they were safe but actually not, and that sounds a little like within the kind of confines of a horror film, 90 minutes, 2 hours, then that's not going to get repeated too much, but over how many hours of 10 seasons or so, that's going to happen with regularity, isn't it?
Sure.
Well, no, I think it's fair enough for you to say that, Kirsty, and I will say that basically in my viewing of The Walking Dead, I've fallen off the wagon. No, that's the wrong way to say it. But I've lost touch with the show on 2 occasions, and one of them was kind of early season 4. Having really enjoyed it, eventually you just, like I say, it was what I wanted. It was basically Night of the Living Dead, but it doesn't end. It just keeps going on.
Yeah.
But eventually I just suddenly realised, but this is never going to end, is it? And, at first it's really thrilling that, characters who you like will be killed, and therefore nothing feels safe. But eventually you go, wait a minute, nothing is safe. And therefore, because nothing is safe, everything is boring. And therefore I kind of stopped watching it, and I didn't pick it up again until watching it for this. But I'm really glad I did watch what I saw from mid-season 4 onwards. And you kind of recommended that to me, Stella, because certainly
I love season 4.
I remember you talking about how it falls into kind of discrete stories about individual characters or pairs of characters doing different things in different places.
It's like a road movie, season 4.
Yeah.
Each character going on their own little sort of journey and epiphany. I loved season 4.
Yeah, and I thought that stuff was really great. And in a way, the fact that they go to different settlements and there's like a bad one it kind of works dramatically the way that the bad there's like one that's bad and one that's bad, and then one that's kind of complex but bad things happen, even though people are doing their best and things like this. It kind of, there's a sense that everything kind of contributes until eventually they find a place which might be good. I say might because that's where I stopped watching it, and I think I'm going to leave it there. Or maybe I'm going to do what you suggested, Stella, and jump 4 seasons, because I've only got 1 season left with Glenn by the sound of it, and if that's all I got, I don't want it.
Enjoy Glenn while you've got him, and then come in at season 9.
Right. So I might give that a try. And just to pick up on your point, Kirsty, as well about the zombie genre is not your favourite genre. I think I understand where you're coming from. It's not my favourite genre either. And the zombies are not my favourite monsters, and I think the reason is because there's nothing aesthetically pleasing about a zombie, unlike a vampire or whatever, which can be kind of quite fascinating. Yes. But I do, because of that, because they're horrible, I do find zombies really frightening. Me too. I have regular nightmares about 3 things. This is probably some deep insight. Nazis, zombies, and the aliens from the Alien movies.
Right.
The really bad ones are where there's Nazi zombies and aliens
there is a Nazi
me.
zombie movie, isn't there?
Yeah,
Wasn't
there
it
is.
advertised while we were at Grimfest? What's it called?
Yes, it was Overlord.
That's the fella. Yeah.
I've not seen it. There's a few films that do Nazi zombies, even going back to, there's a 70s film with my favourite Peter Cushing in it called Shockwave, which is about Nazi zombies. I won't go near any of those. For what I hope are understandable reasons, but maybe I should face my fear. But no. So
do it, Dan.
So that's why I don't regard zombie movies as like my favourite genre or my favourite monster. But I will go and watch them again and again because I can fairly guarantee that they will frighten me, and therefore I'll not have a tepid experience in the cinema. With that,
nobody wants that.
No.
Nobody wants that.
Certainly not in a horror movie. So.
No.
You don't want to come out going...
No. And we've done that as well, haven't we? So,
we've all done that.
Guys, I think maybe we're coming close to time.
I think so.
I think possibly we have said a lot that we'd like to say about The Walking Dead. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Stella, just before we finish? Because we can go on next week to talk about the impact that The Walking Dead had and the way series in its wake changed. But go on.
I think that's about it. I mean, I think as we talk about other horrors next week, I think there'll be bits that The Walking Dead can feed into from this week, and I don't want to sort of complicate it because I think we've covered, why it came to be, what it did for the industry, and how it's used some old and new TV sort of techniques. I think we're ready to talk about everything that followed next week.
Wow.
To be
Hannibal.
Continued, as it were. What was that, Hannibal?
Oh, Hannibal!
I've never heard of it, Kirsty. What are you talking about?
No, it's a new one on me.
I know. Hey.
Actually, it came up on in my Netflix queue today. Actually, shows you might like.
Just shows you might
who
like.
knows? I might have a look at that. But just one more thing I'd like to say. Kirsty, you kind of dropped off from The Walking Dead, kind of season 2-ish. Because of the child focused storylines. Stella, remind us, is it season 2 where there's the horrendous childbirth scene?
That's in season 3.
Is it?
About
okay.
halfway through season 3, and Laurie has to have a cesarean.
Oh, I'm so glad I missed that.
That's
so
appalling.
the zombies are piling in the prison, and she goes into labour, which is just what you want when you go into labour, and she has to submit to a cesarean by poor Maggie, who doesn't know what the hell she's doing, and Carl sees it all as well. It's a really good episode. But yeah, my friend watched it when she was pregnant, and she, for the second time, she'd had a cesarean the first time, and she watched that episode and rang me, and she was like, "I've just watched it. Why have I just watched it?" I was like, well, just change your birth plan. Don't want a cesarean by a rusty knife, and you'll be fine.
Oh, God.
Well, I've never had a cesarean. I was born via one, but even so, I found that pretty horrendous viewing. So it was even before that you got out of there.
Oh yeah. So, any small child in danger.
Oh
There's
no!
An episode in.
Is it Sophia?
Episode in season 5.
Go on.
Oh, yeah, is it the little girl that bothered you, Kirsty?
I can't remember.
Or is it Carl being shot?
Oh, there was something with the farmhouse.
Yeah,
Sophia's missing.
Yeah.
And Carl's been shot.
Yeah, I was like, no, I can't take all these children in peril.
In season 4, there's two little girls, and one of them is clearly a psychopath. So that's an interesting episode. Have you seen that yet, Dan?
Yes, I have. Yes.
It's called that episode's called The Grove.
Oh,
anyway,
gosh,
we'll talk more about TV horror next week.
No, indeed.
We'll talk about The Walking Dead for hours.
Yeah, and how marvellous it is, and what a pleasure it's been. Okay, so we'll wind that up for this week then. Hopefully, listeners, that's as much TV horror talk as you can take for a week. That'll tide you over nicely, and then we'll have even more next week. For now, Stella and Kirsty, have we got recommendations for this week?
I've got a little one, although I must say up front, I'm recommending it without having seen it yet. It's a short horror that has been made entirely via Zoom, and you can watch it on Vimeo, and you can rent it for £3.15, and it's called Unsubscribe, and the synopsis I've got here is 5 YouTubers join an online video call and find themselves haunted and hunted by a mysterious internet troll. It's been written and directed by Christian Nilsson. I don't know who he is, if I'm honest. It might just be Unfriended on Zoom.
Right.
But because there's no cinema happening at the moment, on June the 10th it was number 1 at the US box office.
Yeah.
So
I saw that as well.
So I've not actually watched it yet, but it's £3.15 if you want to rent it via Vimeo. And I'm going to have a look at it this weekend.
Okay, good
It
call.
sounds interesting.
Will it be as good as Rob Savage's efforts?
Probably not.
How about you, Kirsty?
I don't have a horror strictly recommendation. Horror strictly, that's a pitch, isn't it? So yeah,
Love a genre hybrid.
Yeah. So I'm going to recommend The Vast of Night, which is available on Amazon Prime at the moment. It's an American independent sci-fi film set in the 1950s in New Mexico, so you know where this is heading. Written, directed, produced, and edited, by Andrew Patterson, and it's one of those films that's got quite a lot of critical buzz around it. Lots of on the kind of the things that I follow anyway. Lots of people going, "Oh, this is a kind of really inventive, low budget sci-fi film," and it's we watched it last weekend. Very pleasing, very nice camera work, very a small budget, well spent, I would say.
That sounds like something I could probably watch with my husband. We could watch something together.
Yes, and it's
Imagine
only
that.
90 minutes as well. And
Cool.
I think that it definitely stands a second watch, because formally it's quite interesting. So
Oh, wow, okay.
Cool.
So what's
Thanks.
the name of that one again, Kirsty?
it's called The Vast of Night.
The Vast of
And it's
Night.
on Prime, you say?
It's on Prime, yeah.
Cool.
Right, that's another reason to be a member of Prime. Excellent. My recommendation is also horror adjacent, and it's also Amazon Prime. So it's not really horror, but it is horrifying. Anybody who's read or seen a version of 1984 by George
Right.
Orwell will, I'm sure, will attest that there are horrifying things in it.
Yes.
And in 1954, the BBC did a live adaptation of it. I mean, that's obviously, it's only 6 years after the book came out. And this was in the early days of TV, and it was an incredibly controversial production at the time. We were talking earlier about, your producers having to stand up and answer questions about the horror they've put out is a mark of success in the field. This particular production was talked about in the Houses of Parliament at the time.
Wow.
I think possibly it really upset the Queen, or something like that. And
That is a
it's
badge
got
of honour.
It's got a number of horror connections because I get to mention him twice this episode. It's my favourite actor, Peter Cushing, playing Winston Smith. It's the role that it happened before he was a star of horror films. It led to him being found by Hammer Films to do their movies. And another actor two other actors actually who'd go on to be stars of horror movies, Andre Morel and Donald Pleasance, are also in it. And it's written and produced and directed by one of my favourite writers, Nigel Neal, and his producer-director partner, Rudolph Cartier, who had just basically invented the genre of science fiction horror on television with the Quatermass Experiment the year before. So it's a really significant team. And unfortunately, the Quatermass Experiment doesn't really exist. I think they lost most of the episodes, but this production, 1984, does, and it's on Amazon Prime. And I really recommend it. It's obviously very, very dated, but I watched it when I was at uni, and it's so powerful. And an interesting companion piece on Prime, they've also got the movie version that was made a couple of years later with a largely different cast. I've not seen it, but could be an interesting example of Hollywood kind of going, "Oh, we'll have that would be great," and then kind of changing almost everything that made the original version work, which we've kind of talked about before in relation to kind of English language remakes and stuff. So the only connection between the TV version and the film is that Donald Pleasance is in both, in a relatively small role. But certainly the BBC one is fantastic and really worth the watch. And it's, again, I think that's 90 minutes. So if you can handle the kind of very primitive production, it was done live as well. So I always find live TV kind of fascinating, especially in the early days, because they didn't have the ability to, nowadays you do get live dramas sometimes. But they
do like a live EastEnders every now and then, don't they, or something that.
But they have more
we all
ability.
Watch it for mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. Or the brilliant one last time where Joe Joyner called Ian Beale Adam, the actor's name being Adam Wood. Yeah. But nowadays, unless the actor makes a massive howler like that, usually the technical people can cover up the joins quite easily, which wasn't so easy in the 50s. So I think that examples of live drama from that time are particularly interesting, and kind of, it makes them a little bit tense because you can almost sense that the actors are all terrified, which I think is the sane response. So so that's my recommendation. Not really horror adjacent, but very important from a history of horror point of view, and also very just great in its own right. So, well, I think that wraps us up for this week.
It does.
We've just come up to our time limit, as we always do. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Stella, for guiding us on the first part of our journey through the history of US TV horror. Thank you very much, Kirsty, for your contribution. And, well, I look forward to us all being back together next week to continue this.
Yeah, can it be cooler? That'd be good.
Yes, please.
Yes, let's hope so.
Can you turn it down, please?
That's
so
unanimous. Or we'll all get better air conditioning between now and next week. That might have to happen. All right, thanks very much, everybody. And thank you very much, listeners. And you'll hear from us again soon. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye. Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Stella Gaynor, Kirsty Warrow, and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.